Okay, so we want to build a character and bring it into an application that is going to allow us to apply bones into a rig structure so that we can easily animate our character. I've begun by sketching out my character design in Adobe Fresco, and I've imported that design into Illustrator so that I can create a vector image of this character. I've used my pen tool to trace the outline of my original sketch and adjusted the character to my liking. Each time that I've created a piece of the character, the arm, the leg, the body, the leg, the arm, the head, they're all in separate layers. So I have right leg, right arm, body, left leg, left arm, and the head, all divided up into separate layers. Now this is very useful for future animations using a variety of different applications, including Character Animator and also with After Effects Puppet Tool. We're going to be importing this file into Moho Pro 13. So we'll switch over to Moho, create a new file. Once our file is created, we're going to import that project that we've created in Adobe Illustrator. What we first have to do is make sure that our Illustrator document is saved in an earlier format of Illustrator that Moho can recognize. So back in Illustrator, we'll hit File, Save As, Adobe Illustrator, and we'll name it I8 for Adobe Illustrator 8. Call it whatever you want, but this is going into Illustrator 8, so that seems appropriate. And they'll give me a few options. The version will be whatever version you currently have for your Illustrator. You can select version at the top and choose Illustrator 8. When you hit OK, it will give you a dialog box telling you that this is an older format of Illustrator. That's fine, that's what we want. Once that file has been saved into the appropriate format, we're going to go back into Moho Pro 13, select File, Import, General Import. Now when I import my AI file, it's going to only bring in the vector elements. That's because I've imported it as vector graphic file. So I don't see my original sketch. I will only see the elements that were created in Illustrator, the vector file images. So in order to see that original sketch, because I don't have my tail created yet, I will choose File, Import, Tracing Image. So if we're starting from scratch in Moho, and we're going to be drawing the entire character using Moho's tools for drawing, we'll import a tracing image. Back in Adobe Illustrator, I made sure that all of the vector graphic layers in my Illustrator file were deselected so that only my sketch layer was visible. I then exported as a PNG file from Illustrator. To access that option, you go to Illustrator, File, Export, Export As. You select the format PNG from the Format dropdown. Now that file can come from anywhere. I had created that originally in Adobe Fresco, so I can export that PNG file or JPEG file from Adobe Fresco and bring that directly into Moho if I'm creating the entire drawing from within Moho. Now I want to trace over that PNG file using Moho's drawing tools. So I'll create a new layer I'll call it tail. I would select new layer vector in order to create vector graphics within the Moho application. So now with my tail layer selected, now I'm going to select the freehand drawing tool, or F on the keyboard, over in the left hand menu section. These tool options will change depending on what layer and drawing style that you'll be using. So the easiest way to create drawings in Moho is to use the freehand tool, and up in the top area, top bar of the window, you'll see an option for freehand options. If you select that, you'll be able to choose your smoothing, which will smooth out your line as you draw. It will give you an option to reduce the number of points that are used. And it'll also give you options for your tablet, whether you want to use pressure. We're not going to use any pen pressure. We're not actually using a tablet, but we also want our line to remain straight. We do not want any tapering or anything with our line, so we're going to use none. It's a good idea to select auto weld, because that will automatically close the path that we create, creating a shape as opposed to a single line. So with the freehand tool selected, I'm going to loosely draw around my shape. This will be a lot easier with a tablet. I'm using a touchpad right now. Once my loose drawing of the shape is created, I can zoom into that shape and start moving the points around. By using the selection points or select points tool, or G on the keyboard, in the tools draw menu, I'm able to select that object and its individual points. Using the transform points tool in the draw menu, or T on the keyboard, I can move those points around. I can also adjust the curves with the curvature tool, or C on the keyboard. And I can choose to select the shape as a fill layer, which we can get into later on when we're coloring our figure. For now, we're going to be moving our points around. Before we actually begin designing our character and drawing our character, we should make sure that we are in frame 0. This is the design mode for Moho. So in our timeline here, if you have a look, we can drag the playhead back and forth between the timeline. We want to drag it all the way to the left-hand side so that it is in frame 0. You'll notice that the toolbar will change as well. It's giving us a lot of options to create with. So if you're ever finding that you are missing tools in your toolbar, just have a look at the timeline and make sure that you are in frame 0 when you are creating your character. So now that we have our basic shape created, I'm going to select the individual points. And I'm just going to move them around to get the general shape indicated by our original drawing. We want to keep the points as few as possible when we're drawing, so that we're not adding additional complexity to our drawing. And it will also help with rendering speeds. You find just by moving points around and grabbing the Bezier handle ends, you can create some pretty accurate lines with a few amount of points. Just keep moving these points around until you get something that's pretty close to what you want it to be. If you find that you just can't get any more shapes accurate to your original line, we'll start adding additional points. To do that, we'll go to the Tools menu under Draw and select the Add Point option, which is also A on your keyboard. Again, I want to keep the points as minimal as possible, so I'm going to be very selective here. I'll add a point here so that I can bring the line down. And I'll also add a point here so that I can close off the shape into a more rounded edge. Go back and select my Transform Points tool again, which is T on the keyboard, and maneuver those points that I just made into positions that closely resemble my original sketch. Just keep moving the points around until they're as close as possible. Now I have a few extra areas that intersect. Little details that I wouldn't mind drawing in. So I can use the freehand tool once again for that. Draw in those shapes. Remember that the freehand tool also has options. I want my smoothing to be very high on this. So I'm going to redo those shapes. And I can once again transform those points to get them more accurate to my drawing. If I had auto weld turned on, you'll see that switch in the top here that will automatically weld our lines together. And don't worry about the fill right now. You'll see that I have a lot of intersecting lines. We'll be filling our character shapes later. We can now set about choosing the individual character parts from our originally imported drawing from Illustrator and separating those into individual layers as well. So we already have our tail in a separate layer because we've just drawn that in Moho, but now we have to go to our imported file from Illustrator and separate all of the elements out into different layers, much like the tail is. If I had drawn this character entirely in Moho, I would have created a new layer for each section and drawn over that. But because it was an imported file, I now have to separate these shapes. So I'll start by creating a new layer. First, we'll make sure that we are, in fact, on the design level, which is time frame 0. Select New Layer, Vector Image, Click once on that layer and it should enable you to rename it. So now I'm going to go through and select each of the character parts, create a new layer, cut and paste them into the new layer that I've just created so that all of the body parts are separated into different layers. In order to select the shapes that I want, I need to be on the layer. I need to have that layer selected with the artwork. Moho will only allow you to choose and edit artwork that is on the selected layer, the layer that you have selected. To select all of our individual artwork, we're going to use the Transform Points tool and individually select each shape that we see within our artwork. To continue drawing our character in Moho, we're going to fill in the lines that are hidden behind certain sections of our character. Because we are in 3/4 view, we're going to hide the body layer. And because we already created a stroke in our previous example, and that was for the tail of our character, I can select the tail layer to determine the size of the stroke that was used. And then under the Fill section in the Tools menu to the left, we'll choose Select Shape. When I click on that stroke in my tail layer, it will give us the stroke width in the Style panel. The Style panel is located on the right top hand side. It'll be beside the Actions panel if you have one available there. Style panel also gives you a color selection and a choice whether we want to fill the stroke or not. So right now we're just going to take note that the stroke width is 4. And I want to finish drawing my arm, my right arm, so I'm going to select the arm right layer that I created earlier. Grab the freehand tool, or F on the keyboard, and start drawing. Now I don't need an exact guide for this. It's a pretty straight, basic line. You'll notice that as my line got close to other lines, a little red circle appeared. That's to tell us that it was about to join those lines. Now, if I don't want it to join the lines, I can deselect Merge Strokes at the top menu within the freehand options. And we'll also want to deselect Auto Weld. That will close off our shape. Now when I draw, I can draw anywhere without it affecting or attempting to join other shapes. For this particular example, we're going to want our merge strokes turned on so that it will merge the stroke to the other strokes that are in that layer. I'm going to get an approximation of where I want my stroke to be, and that looks pretty good. Because this is a straight line or a straight-ish curve, I don't have a lot of points in there, and it's not going to allow my elbow to bend. We'll come back to this later when we begin animating the bones, but if you were to start drawing your character's lines and trying to discover where different joints might meet and bend, you'll be wanting to put specific points where the bends would appear within your character's shapes. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Now my character is separated into a tail, head, 2 separate arms, 2 separate legs layer. Perfect and ready for adding our bones or the rig to this character to start animating. To separate our artwork into individual layers, we are going to select the layer that our artwork currently exists in. We'll create a new layer, a new vector layer. Click on the layer once to rename it. In this case, it's going to be my head layer. Make sure that we're in frame 0 for the design. I'm going to select my original layer with my artwork, and I'm going to grab the Select Points tool over in the Draw menu. Now when I select an area by clicking and dragging over top, it's going to select all of the objects within that span. I don't want to select any of the body at this point, so I'm going to be careful to avoid that. I'm just going to grab the elements that I want. For those pieces that I'm unable to select using the drag to select option, I will hold down my Shift key and just click once on the additional objects that weren't selected. When I think that I've got all of my objects selected, I can then go to Transform Points, or T in the keyboard, and just move my shape to see if I've got everything. If I have and it all looks good, I can Command Z or undo what I've just done with the move. And then I will cut this artwork out of its original layer and paste it into my new layer, the one that I've called head. You can select the option to cut from the edit menu or hit Command X to cut. Select the layer that I had previously created called head, and then Command V or paste. Now that I have the head and a new layer, I will make it invisible by clicking the little eyeball icon to the left of the layer. Select the layer that contains all of the artwork. And begin selecting the objects that I want to paste into a new area. Or I should say layer. And select the objects that I wish to place into a new layer. I'm going to grab the arm. This will be the right arm. Being careful not to select any of my other objects. Hold Shift to select on objects that I don't believe have been selected. Use the Transform Points tool to move that selection to see if I've got everything. Command Z to put it back in its place. Now I'm going to cut that artwork from the layer, create a new vector layer. You can also double click the layer if it doesn't pop up right away and allow you to rename it. Once I have that new layer selected and named, I'll paste my artwork into place. Command V. Now that that layer is done, I will make it invisible and continue on with the rest of my character's parts. Bye.